I want to say a word or two about religion nowadays, what I'm going to call religion in 2015. I find it uncanny that the one narrative in my life that I'm aware of that has remained relevant throughout my lifetime is the religious narrative and no other. Though the true religious narrative has been, to my culture, completely lost, and if not lost, it's nearly invisible. It's been replaced by a secular religious narrative, which is like an insubstantial red herring. It pretends to be the religious narrative and stands in for it, but by standing in for it, it completely undermines the actual religious narrative, which has been coming down for, say, 5,000 years since it was first embodied in oral and written tradition through the Hindus and the Hebrews primarily. And you had Egyptians copying the Hebrews or whoever they copied. You had the Buddhists taking their commentaries from the Hindus, and it all comes down through history. And of course, that narrative, if you go back and just did a cursory examination, the Hindu narrative was one of a life of meditation in order to combat an attachment to the physical reality so perceived. It was an understanding that our perceptions of I want and I need and I love this and I want that are in fact a lesser expression of the true reality that we are a part of, and that we have a higher reality that's only attainable by detaching from this lower physical attachment. And then that can only be done through a life of dedicated meditation. From that, the Buddhists say Buddha himself, he starts his own school in reaction to that of the deistic and theistic understandings. He doesn't want to even put any of the responsibility on God or anything else. It's purely on us to withdraw from all of this obvious creation of suffering and adhere to right thinking, right action, etc., and dedicate ourselves to that in order that we might eradicate suffering, which is something that we all face, even if we don't feel it in a moment physically. Being part of an entire system of suffering is to put us in suffering as well. And so only that by a strict dedication to this abasement, this abdication of the ego and the attachment to ourselves as such could lead to that. The Chinese, going back many thousands of years, also advocated a life of contemplation to discern the appropriate values and loyalties that were appropriate in accordance with what they called the way of heaven, meaning that the deeper thing that was perhaps undefinable, but certainly obvious in this contemplation, that there is a deeper web of which we're all attached. And when we go against that strain, when we go against that movement, that chi, that force of life, we are in fact creating disease in every fashion, right down to inside our own bodies, certainly in our families, society, and it goes out from there in the Chinese understanding. And so that required a life of contemplation to make sure that you could discern what was the correct application of your loyalties, your value system, and you'd have the inner resolve to apply yourself that way. The Judaic tradition, which is as old as the Hindu or the Chinese, all we get from it nowadays is the Ten Commandments. But of course, that's just a footnote. That's a small part of the Hebraic tradition contained in the Torah, which, when studied, is a tradition of establishing laws of forgiveness, mercy, and justice or equality. That's what was paramount. That's why the Ten Commandments existed as something you could post up that everybody could remember, because the whole law was concerned with the establishment of forgiveness, mercy, and equality, which is why they had to give back, they had to forgive all debts every 7 years. They couldn't loan money at interest. Every 50 years they had to give back all property. So no one could build up an empire and take the other people's property or anything, because you had to give it all back. All the money every 7 years, you had to forgive the debts you couldn't charge interest on to begin with. And every 50 years you had to give back whatever property had been pledged to you, so that you couldn't hang on to that either. So it was all built in, that equality. They were absolutely not allowed to discern between the one who had much and the one who had nothing. In fact, they were under an obligation to take care of the poor. They were under an obligation to forgive at least 3 times in their lifetime. If they didn't find a reason to forgive somebody 3 times in their lifetime, they couldn't have this blessing of God that they were seeking. So the real Hebraic tradition is something that established in mankind this idea that we aren't just brutes that can kill each other because we're able to, but that we're bound to forgiveness, mercy, and justice as a way of life that descends from this higher expression of life. And then, of course, the Christian expression that comes through that from 2,000 years ago, love your neighbor as yourself. All are equally guilty, and therefore nobody's allowed to judge each other at all. In fact, we're even told we got to love our enemies. So it's interesting that when I look at religion in 2015, I see nothing but selfishness. I'm supposed to love myself. So, that's the excuse of how to love everyone else. The power of now, just make myself happy. The secret is just to go with my inner higher person, which is just seeking my own comfort and happiness. I'm not to go throw myself in the way of genocide or injustice, or stand for anything that might get me hurt or make my physical life uncomfortable. Oh, that's become the irreligious thing to do. So I find it very interesting that even the people that profess to be Buddhists and such, they drive around in BMWs in Hollywood nowadays talking about we're Buddhists. That's very interesting. I wonder how Buddha would think of that. And same way with the Christians. They run around judging everyone. Now the gays have a right to get married. You think the Christian church had just, up and been crucified. Whereas, what's that got to do with anything? It's just another reason to love your neighbor. I mean, what does that relieve the Christians from their responsibility for, and start judging people? So anyway, I think it's something to think about. The religion expression's been lost, and it seems to me to be always connected with the suffering that Buddha was trying to eliminate, because it comes down to one very simple thing inside. The religious expression is a call to selflessness and a duty to one's neighbor, to one's other human being, that's equal to the duty to oneself, that if we all took that on, every problem vanishes and utopia just appears right out of our heart. What did Jesus say? Heaven is within you. So anyway, that's where religion is for me, and that's where religion is in 2015. Hope this helps.